All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Harrison Lum, and I'll be your moderator for today. This session is titled DOT Airports Construction Inspection BMP Program and the Veoci Construction Module. This session is being streamed concurrently to our virtual conference platform. At the end of the presentation, the speakers will be accepting questions and they'll be answering whatever questions you have. If you are a virtual attendee, you can type in your questions at any time and we'll answer them at the appropriate time. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for this session. First, we have Mikki Slentz. She is a graduate of California Polytechnic University at Pomona, and is a licensed engineer in Hawaii and California. She is an accomplished project manager and engineer with more than 10 years of MS4 program management and varied stormwater experience. Mikki is well-versed in construction and post-construction BMP compliance, as well as MS4 and other stormwater regulations. We also have Jenna Stone, who is a graduate of Kapa'a High School and UH Manoa in civil and environmental engineering. Her work experience has been primarily in the stormwater and construction fields. Jenna has more than 2 years of experience conducting construction inspections for large-scale projects at DOT airports. Projects include the new H&L Conrack facility and the Hart Rail project. She also has experience reviewing project plans and specifications for environmental compliance. Please help me in welcoming Mikki and Jenna. Thank you.
Hi, Harrison. Thank you for the introduction. Nice to be here in person finally after all this time. So we'll go right into it. So the question is, which projects are applicable? So the answer is all construction projects with land disturbance, regardless of its size. They must implement temporary BMP measures, and they must be in compliance with the DOTA Construction Activities BMP Field Manual. And this can be found on the DOTA website. And that second bullet, self-inspections must be conducted by the contractor. This can also be the CM as well, depending on the project. And then finally, the AirEE, which is the airport's environmental engineering sector, will determine if third-party inspections are required for your project, as well as the frequency. So we'll go through the types of inspection just as a quick run through. So we have pre-construction, routine, and final. So first off, pre-construction, this is going to occur prior to the start of construction. So the contractor or CM, the project team, is responsible for reaching out to AirEE to schedule a pre-construction inspection at the project site. And what other projects in the past have liked to do have invited us to the pre-construction meeting. This is a good way to kind of get us involved and have those questions that you may have early on answered. That way we can be aware of these things and kind of work through it prior to that actual construction initial inspection. And we do ask that you schedule it at least 2 weeks in advance, and this is just to accommodate for existing projects that already have slots and whatnot in order to not have any delays. And then we ask that, or the program asks that all required contractor documents are submitted and reviewed by AirEE prior to the inspection. This includes documents such as the contractor's BMP map. And this is a good way to kind of look at some of those larger deficiencies that might come up during those initial inspections. For example, say you have a site and then there's an area that would need perimeter sediment controls. During that review process, hopefully we can identify those areas and let you know in advance. And then that way, say if the contractor had to order more socks or more materials, at that point, they'd have some time before that initial inspection. And then finally, all deficiencies noted during the initial must be corrected prior to conducting land disturbing activities. And this is a differentiation we wanted to note, just because sometimes contractors will think at the initial they can start work, but it's important to note that any deficiencies that we do find do need to be corrected and closed. And going back to that previous bullet point, it's also good to kind of eliminate some of those larger deficiencies that we might see. So ideally, we want to see kind of small deficiencies where it takes perhaps an hour or two for the contractor to fix it. But sometimes we do have situations, say, where there's no construction, a stabilized construction entrance exit. And then we notice that at the initial inspection. inspection. And then at that point, the contractor would need to perhaps order aggregate or order supplies, and that can cause a delay in actually the starting of work. So hopefully with that review of the contractor's BMP map, we can eliminate those larger things that might take a little more labor hours or a little more time to order. And then finally, we'd like to note that this applies to any new phase or areas of construction. So if you had, say, a stage project where you are on stage 1 and we visited stage 1, we would still need to do an initial for stage 2 if we haven't visited before. What contractors like to do sometimes is if your project is phased, but say you know you're going to start work at stage 2, say January 1st, and we have a routine inspection scheduled for stage 1, December 15th. What they might do, if it's feasible and good for them, they might install the BMP measures for stage 2 prior to that December 15th inspection. Let us know. Then when we go out on December 15th, we can look at both areas. Stage 1 is a routine, as well as stage 2 for initial. And then that gives the contractor a good duration of time to kind of address any deficiencies in order to meet that January 1st start date. Next, we have routines. This is going to be throughout the life of the project. And as we mentioned before, it's going to depend on your project size, your scope, whether they may be conducted for the project, and it will be determined by AREE. And then usually it's going to be a monthly or quarterly schedule, depending on your project. Finally, we'll go through the final inspection. So this is going to be at the end of the project or every phase. And these are the conditions listed here below that show what constitutes a final inspection. So that first one, all land disturbance has ceased. All equipment and materials have been removed. Note that this only applies to the equipment, the materials that you may have, but it doesn't apply to, say, your BMP measures that you have installed. So at that time, you'll still have your perimeter sediment controls, your drain inlet protections, and those will remain in place. And then vegetation has been restored to pre-construction conditions. So we'll take a look and we'll see if the pictures from the initial match the current conditions. And finally, at least 70% stabilization has been reached if there's vegetation. This is a good thing to keep in mind. I believe some other people have mentioned it as well, is if you have vegetation that you need to install in the area, sometimes we have situations where we reach the end and then we're waiting for grass to grow. So then every month we go out and we look at the grass and then come back another month. So just a good thing to keep in mind in terms of scheduling if vegetation is going to hold you up at the end. All right, so now that we've had a brief overview of the program, I'd like to see kind of if we all know what are the most common BMPs and see if we're right. I actually guessed and I was wrong, so we'll see if you guys can get it. So I have 3 different ideas of what could be the most common BMP deficiency that we find in the field. So I'll list 3 of them and then you can raise your hand if you think that's the most common BMP occurrence. So number 1 is going to be material storage and handling. Number 2 is going to be perimeter sediment controls. And number 3 is going to be drain inlet protections. So if you think that material storage and handling is the most common BMP, please raise your hand. Okay. How about perimeter sediment controls? Raise your hand. All right. And then what about drain inlet protections? Raise your hand. Okay. So it looks like the common or the most common one seems to be the drain inlet protections from what we're thinking here. So let's see if we're correct. So we have this pie chart. Note that it is only the 2021 to 2022 H&O track deficiencies, but we're hoping that it reflects the entire program as a whole. So as you can see here, it's a little small, but on the right-hand side has all the categories. We'll go kind of through the larger categories in a minute as well. But I just wanted to note that it's interesting to me, that I found it interesting, is that each sliver is actually pretty evenly distributed, even the kind of the smaller slivers. And I think that speaks to kind of the variety of activities, different site conditions that you see. And it shows that every project really is different. It can even be project scope that determines what your common BMP deficiencies are. For example, if you have a project has a lot of concrete work, your common BMP deficiency might be washout facilities, but say you're a project that doesn't have a lot of concrete work, that might not be as much of a concern for you. So it was very interesting. We'll highlight the top 4 here. So on the right-hand side in the blue, 7% is tracking and construction entrance exits. That's going to be sediment tracking outside of your area, going onto roadways and that sort of thing, as well as construction entrance exits at those access points for your equipment, your trucks and whatnot. Number 3 in the yellow is going to be perimeter sediment controls. And that includes, the compost filter socks. You might see the green and black, and then also silt fences as well. And number 2 is going to be solid waste management on the left-hand side. It's kind of a broad category, but it encompasses all things like trash, construction waste. It's going to be the handling of waste as well as storage, even the location of the waste. And yeah, it should encompass everything. And finally, our number 1 is actually material storage and handling, which was very surprising to me. But it also does make sense in a way because it, again, is a very broad category. So it encompasses everything such as liquid storage, hazardous material storage, even things like rusted metal storage. And so it's actually pretty surprising. It's number 1. It's surprising that even looking at this pie chart here, we have material storage and handling and solid waste management as almost half of the pie. So interesting to know. So what we did here is we isolated those top 4 common BMP deficiencies to kind of talk a little bit about it more, kind of get some feedback and see if you guys can recognize the BMPs that are wrong. So first up, we have stabilized construction entrance exits. So can anybody look at this picture and tell me what appears to be wrong? Okay, so as you might have guessed, we have a guess.
Runoff, the tracking.
Yeah. So you. That's a good guess. Thank you. So you said no tracking controls for that access point. So as you can see in this photo, this is one of the sites here. We won't say which one. We've cropped it so that hopefully it's not too easy to identify. So the contractor has installed some concrete barriers, and then they left a little area where they didn't install a concrete barrier, and it was for access. As we could see in the sediment, there were tracks of vehicles coming in and out of that area. So to note that every access point, if you're going to be using it for equipment and vehicles, should have a piece, whether it be aggregate or whether it be a rumble plate, it should be installed, or it should be not used as an access point. So if you have, say, another access point, you can also choose to eliminate this area as an access point if that's easier for your site. So this would not be a good example of a good BMP. So we have here some examples of good BMPs. On the left-hand side, we have an aggregate stabilized construction entrance exit. And this one is nicely laid out. You can see it's very thick. There are specifications in terms of length, width, as well as even the size of aggregate that you can use. And these can all be found in our DOTA manual. It is pretty comprehensive. It's also a good guide if, say, you have maybe newer staff that might not be as familiar. They can reference the BMP manual to see what are the specifications that I should be meeting. And then on the right-hand side, we have an alternative measure. This is commonly referred to as rumble plates or rumble strips. And it's also an effective way to eliminate sediment from vehicle tires, kind of vibrates your car as you're driving over it. And, either one works. Depending on your site, some contractors might prefer one over the other. For the right-hand side, they do prefer those, I've noticed, for staged projects or projects that might have a lot of different construction areas. And just for the simple reason that it's mobile, if you're moving on to a next section, you can actually take that rumble plate and just install it versus the aggregate is a little more difficult. All right, so I'd like to talk about some parameter sediment control measures. So one thing is to match the project's approved BMP map. And this kind of goes back to that previous thing that we were talking about for the initial is sometimes we'll come out for an initial and we'll notice that the BMP map said that they were going to install biosocks in the area, but then the socks aren't there. And in that case, we'd have to tell them to install BMP measures along that area in order for them to start work. So in that case, sometimes if it's a large area, maybe they actually have to go and order more socks or wait or actually install it. So that might take a little time too, depending on how many labor hours they have at that time. So a good thing to note is that if you have your approved BMP plan, that you should be just checking, making sure that where the socks are supposed to be or other perimeter sediment control measures needs to be, that they're there. That way, when we get for the initial, we're good to go and you can start work as soon as possible. And then another thing we wanted to note is not to exceed the limits of the MPDS permitted areas. So it'll have a certain square footage, a certain shape that you've gotten permitted if your project is larger than 1 acre and applicable. But sometimes we'll come out and we'll find that the square is just a little bit off. And so we need to make sure that we're matching that map, that approved area. So in that case, they have to uninstall all their socks, redo their whole entire area. And that can be a lot of labor hours. So it's a good thing to note before you install anything. All right, I would ask you what's wrong with this, but it's actually already on the bottom here for us. So in this situation, the deficiency was to move the materials stored beyond the installed perimeter sediment controls to within the staging area limits. So in this area, we have a silt fence that was installed and then sort of a 5 feet buffer zone around the edge. And in this photo, you can see that there's some material. So the material was actually outside of the perimeter sediment controls. So it's a good thing to keep a note, making sure all of your materials are within that area. So we created a nice little image for you so we can all visualize it. The white's going to be the perimeter sediment controls. And as you can see, all of the materials except for one are within those perimeter sediment controls. There's one piece of equipment that's on the left that's outside of those limits. So this would not be a good example of a BMP. However, once the contractor moves their equipment all to within the perimeter sediment controls, it would be a good example of a good BMP. All right, so moving on to the second top category, which was solid waste management. Can somebody tell me in the photo pictured if it looks good or if there's something that would be a deficiency? What was that? A cover, yes. So all waste receptacles do need to be covered. It's especially of a concern for the airport as it can become foreign object debris or FOD, but it's also an environmental risk as well to stormwater. So this would not be a good example of a BMP. As corrective actions, the contractor went and found the lid and stuck it back on there. So it's now a good BMP measure. And we've noticed that contractors, sometimes, those lids just go away. We don't know where they go. Someone takes it and then you can't find it again. So we have found that contractors will try to secure the lid to the bin itself, whether it be wire or whatnot. And that seems to help a little bit more just because it physically can't get away from the bin. And we'd like to note that this also applies to, say, larger trash receptacles for construction waste as well. Some contractors will note that it's a little hard to find bins that have covers already on them. You can also use, say, an impermeable layer as well, such as a tarp or something, just to keep out rainwater as well as prevent the wind from scattering the waste. All right, and then this one, as you can see here, the concrete waste facility is exceeding its capacity. So this would not be a good example of a BMP. And as corrective action, the contractor emptied out the bin. So it's now a good example of a BMP. So the concrete waste containers must be cleaned out or no longer used. That's an option as well at the 75% mark or 4 inches of freeboard, whichever is greater. And then all other waste containers must be emptied at that 2/3 capacity mark. Okay. And then finally, number 1, material storage and handling. It was kind of a large, I guess, category. So we picked one that we wanted to highlight here. So can somebody tell me, or I guess we all know what's wrong with it is that it's leaking. Can somebody guess as to why it might be leaking? So basically, even though it's improperly installed in that it's an impermeable plastic and it's bermed up properly, as you can see, I don't know if you could see the edges of the plastic are actually wrapped underneath and then over. So what happens when that is rolled up that way, the corners don't exactly match up together. So it's actually leaking out of the corner because of the way that the berm is wrapped. So this would not be a good example of a BMP. It's practically not working. It's going to spill out regardless. And this is a good example of a similar situation. This is a liquid storage facility, and it's in a similar way that it's an impermeable layer of plastic, and then there's a bermed area on the edges. However, the way that they wrap the plastic is much more efficient in encompassing all of the liquid that would spill. So as you can see in the corners there, the impermeable plastic on the bottom actually goes up and over the edges of the compost filter socks that's used as the berm. And in that situation, those corners would contain the liquid adequately. So this is an excellent example. All right, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and pass it along to Mikki.
Thank you, Jenna. That was a great presentation. I was also really surprised to see that the inlet protection was not one of the #1 controls. And I'm hopeful that that means that the contractors are paying attention and they're really providing good inlet protection because it's the last line of defense. So my name is Mikki Slentz, and I will be going over the Veoci construction module that AIR-EE has put in place. I plan to keep this short and sweet, as database entry is not the most exciting subject around. I'll be giving a very brief orientation of the new AIR-EE construction module in Veoci, including an overview of what Veoci is and the 3 main processes. Veoci is essentially an online interface that has many features and components. The DOTA environmental section, or AIR-EE, uses Veoci to centralize information related to its environmental program. It serves as a platform to maintain forms, permits, records, and documents all in one location. Veoci uses workflows to track information and related processes. AIR-EE has created several modules within Veoci, the most recent being the construction module, which is planned to go live on December 1st. When using Veoci, individuals will receive email notifications throughout the process whenever action is required on their part. I'll touch on that a little bit more as I go through each workflow. Change can be hard, and AIR-EE really wants this process to go as smoothly as possible. So to assist in this new program being used, a stormwater quality requirements for construction projects SOP, along with quick reference guides or QRGs, will be available soon. The QRGs will include step-by-step instructions with screenshots for interacting with Veoci and will be specific to each workflow and each user. There are 9 QRGs in total, including one for getting started and general information. These documents will be available for download on the DOTA environmental webpage and also available if you request by AIR-EE or somebody that's working with you. For anyone who's really stuck, please feel free to contact me. I will either help you through the process or submit a ticket to fix any issues. We've tried to create this system or this workflow, these workflows from scratch, and we've tested relentlessly. So we really hope that this process will be seamless, but these things rarely are, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with using new systems. So please be patient with any hiccups along the way, knowing that it will only improve as we move forward. And the main goal is really to streamline these processes. The Veoci construction module currently contains 3 main processes: the construction design review, the contractor document submittal, and the construction BMP inspections. Each of these processes will be performed using workflows comprised of a series of steps that will have questions and locations where documents and files can be uploaded. The first workflow we'll be going over is the construction design review. The users for this workflow are designers for projects located on DOTA property. This would include any tenant spaces as well, and design reviewers, which would include AIR-EE and their consultants. Note that designers for new projects will be asked to input their project documents into Veoci, but projects that have already begun partial review will continue using email submittals. One thing to note for the construction design review workflow is that designers will require a Veoci account. So this can be established through a request to AIR-EE when the time is right. The workflow has several steps with 2 major sections. The first section is the PBMP checklist, which contains a series of questionnaires to evaluate each project for post-construction BMPs or PBMP requirements. This includes feasibility for PBMPs and feasibility for lid BMPs. This is where the designer will input information to determine if the project is required to implement PBMPs and if lid BMPs are feasible. The second section is the design review package. This provides fields where the designer can upload project files directly into Veoci. These two sections can be used in parallel, meaning if some documents are available prior to having information ready for PBMPs, the designer can submit those documents first. Each document type will have different options depending on document availability and applicability. Most documents will have an option for not currently available. This can be selected for documents that will be submitted but aren't really ready at the time. This allows for documents that may be ready ahead of others to be submitted without holding up the process for those that are not. Some, but not all file types will have an option for not applicable. Files that are required for projects will not have this option. So if this document is something that's required, regardless of your project type, you can't select not applicable because it's always applicable. This workflow contains many variations depending on the project's size and project type to reduce the need to fill out information that's not applicable to a project. Once the designer submits their project documents, the design reviewer will review and provide comments as necessary. If a review results in comments, an email will be sent to the designer prompting them to return to the workflow and provide responses and upload new or revised documents. Comments will be listed under separate sections for each document type that can be expanded or retracted using the arrow on the top right corner of the section header. You can kind of see it in this image here. It's that small arrow on the top right corner. Documents that do not have comments will show no comments in gray under the document section. So as you go through, if you find you're scrolling a lot and that particular section, this one is the SWIP section, if all of your comments are closed or if you have no comments, you can just minimize that section to make it easier to go through the workflow. The comment responses section in the third column, as shown in the red box, can be used by designers. If there are multiple submittals, all responses, including those from the design reviewer, will be logged in this section for each comment. Note that the top left corner of each comment, there will be a field showing the status of the comment. If open, it will appear red. If closed, it will appear green. The designer should only respond to open comments. So if you have a comment, you've gone through, there's a bunch of back and forth, now it's green, it says it's closed, you do not have to comment on that any further. You can move on to the next one. Once all required documents are submitted and all comments are closed, the designer will be notified of REE approval. Yay. The next workflow we'll go over is the contractor document submittal. This workflow is very similar to the construction design review, but only involves documents required to be submitted by contractors. So in that sense, it's a little bit less complex. The users for this workflow are contractors for projects located on DOTA property and design reviewers. Once the contractor is selected, they will receive an email with the documents prepared by the designer that will need to be uploaded with additional site-specific information, such as the BMP plan or the SWIP. These documents are prepared using DOTA templates that the designer will first complete with information known to them, but some site-specific information such as staging areas and contractor-specific information such as contact information will be left highlighted for the contractor to complete. The email will also include a list of additional documents required and a link to the VOC contractor document submittal workflow. So this is a little bit different in the sense that contractors will not require a VOC account and can access the workflow from the link provided. So if you're a contractor and you're looking to use VOC to upload documents, or I'll go over the inspection workflow later, you do not need your own account. We will provide links and you can click on those to access the workflows. The contractor will then upload all required documents directly into VOC for review. If a review results in comments, another email will be provided to contractors, prompting them to return to the workflow to provide responses and upload new or revised documents. And again, very similar to the construction design review process, there will be a section dedicated to comment responses between the contractor and the design reviewer. Once all required documents are submitted and all comments are closed, the contractor will be notified. It is important to note that living documents such as the SWIP or the SS BMP plan or the BMP plan, which is the map that goes along through construction, those can change during construction, and that's completely fine. And design documents that are not available after construction begins, those can all be submitted to the inspector via email. The inspector will then go through the workflow, reopen it, upload the documents, and that will trigger a new review process. So this workflow is a little bit different in that we will close it and then potentially reopen it as construction goes through its process and documents are changed or new documents are available. All right, lastly, we'll go over the construction BMP inspections. Note that Air EE plans to incorporate VOC into projects currently in construction in phases, but new projects will be inspected using VOC. The users for these workflows are contractors for projects on DOTO property and DOTA inspectors consisting of Air EE and their consultants. There are 3 construction BMP inspection workflows: pre-construction, routine, and final, as Jenna briefly went over in her presentation. Each workflow will be used to generate inspection reports, notify contractors of deficiencies, and track corrective actions. The contractor's contact person will receive an email when the inspector has completed their inspection report with a link to access the deficiencies associated with their project. The link will take the contractor to a dashboard where they can find and select their project. Each open deficiency will be listed under the construction inspection type with a photo and description. Note that in some special cases, as Jenna had mentioned earlier, multiple inspection types may be conducted for one project. For example, phase 1 might have a routine inspection and phase 2 might have an initial inspection or a pre-construction inspection. All open deficiencies will be listed for the project under separate section headings for each inspection type. So you can have a project with a bunch of open deficiencies, and those will be identified in sections for the different inspection types. If a correction action is not accepted by the inspector, the contractor will receive an email with the same link to the corrective actions page. The inspector's comments will be found at the bottom of each open deficiency as shown in the red box. Note that all deficiencies for a project will be listed, but only the ones with corrective actions that were not accepted will have comments in this box. The contractor will then upload new photos and descriptions for review. Note that only open deficiencies will be listed under the project. When a corrective action is accepted, it will no longer be listed. This allows the contractor to upload corrective actions as they are corrected, rather than waiting to upload them all at once. And once corrective actions are accepted and all deficiencies are closed, the contractor will be notified of compliance. All right, that's all we have. I'm going to introduce briefly Stacy Paquette. She is the Air EE section lead, and she manages this program. And I would like for her to say whatever she'd like to.
Thanks, Mikki. Hi, everybody. I'm the DOTA Environmental Section Supervisor, and I just wanted to introduce myself because although we have a construction topic here today, we do oversee all 15 state of Hawaii airports, and we ensure that the airports are all compliant with their permits and various environmental regulations. But more importantly to me, and I think to our whole team, is that we're keeping the oceans clean for everybody. The airports are a necessity here, and we all want clean oceans. So just wanted to introduce myself and thank everybody for coming and being a part of this process. Thank you.
And we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has any, you can ask any one of us.
Sorry, I want to also say, anybody who's joining us virtually, if you can type in your questions, and then we'll answer it at the appropriate time. If you do have a question in the room, just raise your hand and then we'll bring a microphone over to you.
Hi, I'm a designer, so I had a couple just brief logistic questions. Are you folks still requiring that the entire BMP manual be placed into the the bid specs if it's posted on the website?
Yeah, we actually have we have 3 environmental specifications for designers to use for our construction projects. And one of them is a construction pollutant site runoff spec. And in that spec, it actually has a link to our BMP manual. So the actual physical BMP manual does not need to be placed.
Oh, good.
The link is there.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we've been including it as an appendix and it's really long, right? So we don't need to do that anymore.
No, we have revised. So we are constantly trying to revise and better our specifications in our program in general. So do look for updates and ask for the most recent version.
Okay.
And feedback is always good. Like that was actually something that many people had mentioned. So
okay. And then my second question was for the new VOC program, anytime there's a comment made by Air EE, everyone on that team will get notified via email. Is that right?
Yeah, so what'll happen is the designer will submit their package, whatever that package is. Once submitted, it will go to the design reviewer and they'll review every single thing that's submitted and comment on every single one. If there's no comments on the document that you submitted, there'll be no comment under that section. And then once they're done with their review, they will submit it back to you as the designer.
So the software will send us an email. It'll come as a VOC email.
Correct. And they actually just made a change where we can set up the reply person. So if you reply to that, a human will get it.
Oh, okay. But we make the reply or the comments in the VOC program, right? Not via email to.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. So let's go to maybe. Oh, that's inspections. It's very similar for contractor document submittal and the design review. So this is what it'll look like. You'll have the second column there are all the original comments. So it'll have the page number, the section reference, and then it'll have the original comment. And then that third column that's highlighted, that's where it'll have responses. So the response that's listed here is just really brief, but it can, if it's long, you click on that link and it'll bring you to the full response. And then once your response is done, the design reviewer's response will be there, and it'll just go down the line until it's closed out. It's not it will have the project name in the title, and but it will be from Veoci. So it'll have the project in there, and I forget exactly what each one said. There's a bunch of different email templates that we've set up. So I think it's recently just changed. The system has changed where you can reply, and the design reviewer will be that person that will receive your reply. And you'll also see on there who the design reviewer is. If you have questions, you can always ask ARE or the design reviewer directly. It's definitely a collaborative effort. And so if you ever have any questions, if you have questions about Veoci, you can contact me. If you have questions about the design review in general, you can contact the design reviewer or me. And then you can also contact ARE. So we're definitely here to help and make this process as easy as possible.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to get an opinion on the, the trigger for land disturbing activity. So at the airport, there's several elevated roadways, so it's a concrete structure and there's a pavement structure on top of it. So if we are tearing out the roadway structure on top of that concrete structure, do you determine that as being land disturbing and then trigger these BMP requirements?
Yeah, so demolition, DOH actually has a really great facts on their website for the construction appendix C. Demolition is included regardless, even if you're not hitting foundation, demolition is included as land disturbance. So the reason for that is you have that demolished material is a potential pollutant, so it needs to be managed properly.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is for TIPS projects. I know there's other departments within DOTA that review the drawings also, planning, engineering. Is VOC strictly for ARE's review, or do we submit just to VOC and it gets distributed to other departments too?
For the VOC is for all of anything that tenant, DOTA, any construction project that comes through DOTA.
We don't have to submit it.
No, you still, so for tenant improvement projects, they all have to go through district first. And then district will send through to all the different various engineering sections, a review process. And Amy Hunley from our group will email the tenant and provide them with the information to set up the VOC account.
Veoci is only for the environmental section, yeah.
Yeah, it's only for the environmental section.
So I think for form, what is that? M1 and M3, I think it's called. Those get sent to the district engineer via email.
I believe you can send it via email, but I can't speak for the district engineering office.
Okay.
Yeah, if I understand your question correctly, VOC is only for the environmental required. So anything that you submitted to AREE before will be going through VOC instead of email to AREE. So that'll be your SWIPs, your SSBMP plan, and other environmentally regulated documents. But your design plans, structural plans, all of that goes through other departments or sections.
All right. Oh. Okay, one last question.
The FAA exemption zone for permanent BMPs, where could we find that?
Oh, good question. So actually that's part of, it's in VOC. You'll be able to click on a link and it will bring you to a GIS map, and you can find where your project is and select your project on the map, and that's where you will show exemption for that.
And is that's a new feature now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, previously we were looking at the areas, and if it wasn't practicable to do it in a safety, obviously safety areas or access, maintenance of BMPs, we were just doing it that way. But now we have an actual process where you'll get basically a PDF printout that your project's exempt for proof for your project, and also for us for audit purposes that we're looking at every project.
All right, thank you. That concludes our session. Thank you for attending. Our next sessions will begin at 11:15. Thank you.